Hello, everyone. I hope you all can listen me well. Welcome, everyone, to the webinar on information systems for climate action and support, a roadmap and case study. My name is Gerardo Sanchez. Today is the 3rd of February of 2020, 3 p.m. And this webinar is going to last for about 1 hour. I'm a senior advisor at the UNEP DTU partnership, and I also take care of part of the technical implementation of ICAT. Let's talk a little bit about our webinar today. Right after me, Henning Wuester, the director of ICAT, is going to present to us a little bit about the ICAT initiative. Thereafter, William Agyemang-Bonsu from the UNFCCC is going to tell us a bit about the Secretariat insights on the establishment of data information systems for climate action transparency. And then we're going to have the main technical content by my colleague, Ana Cardoso, who's going to talk about technical considerations for the establishment of data information systems. This is an area that has gotten quite a lot of attention lately, and we get a lot of demand from the countries that we assist on this area. So we're very happy that we can address this topic today. Then we're going to learn a bit about the Costa Rican experience in building the SINAMEC data information system. The SINAMEC system has been a bit of a trailblazer in this area, not only in Latin America and the Caribbean, but also beyond. So it's going to be great to have that perspective from Ana Lucía Mora from the Ministry of the Environment and Energy of Costa Rica. And afterwards, we're going to take questions and answers from the participants. And I hope that we can have enough time for those. You all have your participants menu from GoToWebinar, and thereafter there will be the possibility of writing those questions that will be passed on to me, and I will moderate. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Henning Wuester, the director of ICAT, to explain to us a bit more about the ICAT initiative. Henning, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you, Gerardo, and good afternoon or good morning, colleagues. You should now see my screen and the short presentation I've put together. I'm Henning Wuester, director of the Initiative for Climate Action Transparency, and we'll just say a few words by way of introduction about ICAT and our link to information systems. ICAT is a multi-stakeholder partnership, and let me highlight the 4 funding institutions that make our work possible. That's the Environment Ministries of Germany and the Environment Ministry of Italy. And then we've got 2 foundations, Children's Investment Fund Foundation and Climate Works Foundation, supporting us. But on this screen, you also see a lot of the other partners that we are working with. To highlight UNEP DTU partnership, who's organizing this webinar today, and of course the UNFCCC Secretariat, who will also join us here today. The richness of ICAT lies in the work that we do with countries across the globe. And here you see the ICAT map, over 30 countries, in small and big, in all continents, and really very much a collaborative effort. The work of ICAT is implemented in countries by national experts that are then receiving support from the international level. The focus of ICAT is on supporting enhanced transparency so that countries can use that to increase the effectiveness of their policies and actions in order to move towards achievement of the Paris Agreement. Important that work is country-driven. It determines, countries determine what they would like ICAT to do, and any support that we provide is then tailored to the country context and the specific circumstances. Let me highlight what we see from our work with countries as key factors in supporting national transparency frameworks that can be sustained, and that's critical for the Paris Agreement, where countries are supposed to report every second year. So one important aspect is that all stakeholders are engaged on an MRV framework. That means all relevant sectors have to be linked in, all the agencies in the different sectors that have data need to be on board and agreed to share data that is necessary. That even becomes more important when we talk about NDC tracking, where the framework that is utilized by the country for NDC tracking has to be really owned by all the stakeholders so that they are ready to engage in NDC implementation and following up on progress. An important basis for all of this is legislation and the regulatory framework. But the second important foundation for good work with transparency frameworks are integrated data systems. And that is really the topic of the webinar today. You will hear more about two ICAT related activities. One is the guide that UNEP DTU partnership prepared, and the other one is about the national data system CINAMEC of Costa Rica. And let me just highlight here that ICAT has entered into a collaboration agreement with Costa Rica, that we are supporting countries that wish to apply the Costa Rican system in doing so as part of an ICAT project. Costa Rica, and I'm sure they will highlight that themselves, has offered the system as an open source software for use and application by other countries. So one partnership that is important to highlight in this context. So with that, I will also already stop here, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Henning. That was a very nice introduction to ICAT, and we'll have the opportunity to hear more in the session of Q&A. I'd like now to introduce William Agyemang-Bonsu, who's going to give us some insights from the Secretariat on the establishment of data information systems. William, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Harold, and let me welcome all the participants to this webinar. I'm William Agyemang-Bonsu, manager at the Climate Change Secretariat, supporting developing countries in particular on mitigation and transparency. I'll be talking broadly on what are the information that is required in terms of reporting, especially under the enhanced transparency framework of the Paris Agreement. And I pose the question, why bother? It's very critical, because if you look at the list of information that's required, which I've tried to capture in a very concise manner, the national greenhouse gas inventory estimates and projections that you make as a country, we need to be reporting on that. The progress made in implementing and achieving the country's nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement, which Henning was referring to as the NDC tracking, is critical that countries will have that information. We also need to report on climate change impacts and adaptation. For countries that are doing work on adaptation with mitigation co-benefits, you also need to be reporting on these. Countries will need to report on the impacts of implementation of response measures. But also importantly, countries will need to report on financial, technology transfer, capacity building, support needed and also received as a developing country. And the last but not the least, the use of internationally transferred mitigation outcomes. So if you look at the worth of information or the volume of information that needs to be reported, if countries would need to do this reporting, there will be the need for, a one-stop shop system that's in place that allows countries to easily and quickly respond to these needs over time, not only reporting to the convention, but also being able to communicate with other stakeholders in country. I'm just looking again, if you consider putting up a national climate information management system, there are, I would say, 3 basic core components of it that is always required. You need to have the opportunity for stakeholders engage with whoever is the national actor, most cases the national focal point, that could provide data in relation to all the elements that I listed earlier on my first slide. So there should be a system that allows or facilitates data collection, but also provision by all stakeholders. There's also sometimes the need, because the data can be processed in a way. So there's also be a need for a system where data processing happens, or if nothing at all, at least some storage takes place. And then the next very important component is the component that deals with data retrieval, including reporting and use. So at least these 3 important components, they are by no means the limit to it, but at least these important components from experience are shown to be very, very critical. What is also important for us in terms of the design of such a system, and I'm sure the example from Costa Rica would illustrate some of these things, is who should be engaged in this whole process of provision of information, storage, and also retrieval. And there's somebody, and here I'm just limiting myself to a few, not exhaustive in any case, somebody who is responsible. And for many countries that we have worked with, they have what we call the manager, climate information management system manager, who is responsible. And definitely the manager has support team as a core that sort of collate and also bring all this information together. And what is important is that to get the information, like I said, you need to have the data providers also included. The types of information that need to be provided, I've already listed them, but just giving you an example. If you are looking at, for example, provision of information related to climate greenhouse gas inventory, there's certainly provision of activity data, which I will get into depth a little bit. It's very important. The emission factors and the emission estimates themselves become critical. But it's also doing the quality of information that comes into the system is also critical, and that also needs to be addressed, even at the design stages. How would that be ensured? For example, you want to be holding information on uncertainties, the format of the data, and the form of the data, certainly the units are also critical to be looking at. But it's also important because you want to have some tardiness in terms of communication of this information into the system. You need to also be very specific in terms of when. For example, for the inventory that I will give as an example, specific data needs to be provided, and who provides that data. The last but not least is also how, which is an important element. Are there, for example, any national arrangements that can facilitate or compel, I would say, data providers or stakeholders to provide that information? If that system is not there, how can that happen? How can the data be assessed? It's something that we need to be discussing at a national level. I mean, no, not all stakeholders would have the same type of access to the information, and certainly not the general public. So who has access to what data and how can the data be modified or changed? You can define several levels of users, as I mentioned, that can interact with the database. And therefore, for that reason, you must have security systems in place so that you ensure the data integrity, that data is not really corrupted. Another important issue that needs to be addressed, because for many countries and also private sector information, there could be an element of confidentiality associated with the data. Those aspects must also be addressed before you have a system which is public and others can have access to. So these are just a few design considerations that countries will need to talk about. So let me move quickly, because of time, to the example, and this is just an example of greenhouse gas inventory system and what needs to be provided in terms of data. And here I'm limiting myself only to this few. It's not complete, I'll say not exhaustive. The choice of the methods, because of change in the whole aspect, or number of aspects that are engaged in preparing the national inventory, the change over time, proper documentation on which the choice of method that are being used. For example, equations, references, justification for the selection of the methods, all these type of documents that you need to prepare also need to get into the system. They need to be stored or archived in a way. For inventory in particular, activity data is critical. The type of activity data, the values, the units, references that are important, for example, your QA, QC procedures, and the general inventory management system must also be provided. Other factors that certainly would need to be in a system, if somebody wants to query and try to check what you have done with your emission estimates, emission factors is critical. In addition, you have to also be able to have the system allowing others to look at those sensitivities that are associated with your whole inventory. But looking at, again, the greenhouse gas inventory management system, what should be archived or stored within the inventory, the whole climate information system, your processes will have to be documented, they have to be described properly, how to prepare the inventory, a number of meetings that have been held for the purpose of the inventory preparation, instructions for those to follow in your footsteps, assuming tomorrow, if you are the inventory compiler or inventory coordinator, you're not there, somebody else takes up the responsibility, the person should be able to construct or have the information that's available and be able to construct that. So the process must well be described and stored. You can prepare templates of future work, your archiving plan, improvement plans, and others, QA, QC methods. Again, the activity data, which is very important and which we get a lot of complaints from many countries because they don't have proper information management system in place. They've given the responsibility and they come and it's like a blank sheet, starting from scratch. So activity data storage in terms of the information, their sources, contact person are all critical. If you have done changes in the emission estimates, recalculation, for example, if you have used expert judgment, instead of soliciting certain information, you need to document all this important information and where this information can be gathered. Other areas of information that certainly would need to be stored or archived, I've mentioned, is also the methods and emission factors, and certainly references that you have used, the reason for the choice of the methods, any spreadsheets or models that are available at the national level, any instructions that you use in terms of guiding the work on inventory, category of the estimation spreadsheets, results, analysis, plans, measures that you have put in place to maybe improve the whole system, how you conduct your uncertainty analysis, and key category analysis should all be there and stored in your system. Finally, on inventory what's critical is that you definitely would have the inventory emission estimates. Most countries are moving towards preparing what we call national inventory reports. You certainly have responsibility to prepare national communications, even way under the convention. Under the enhanced transparency framework, you are moving towards reporting using common reporting formats. This, with time, need to also be stored. So the final inventory document, for example, is something that is worth being in the system. Certainly, you would want to have each draft in terms of iteration for the purpose of reference by stakeholders, if for nothing at all, at least those that are involved in the inventory preparation. And that is where issues like access and at what level you grant access to which type of documents become important, because the general stakeholder in the country might not have to know that we went from draft 0 to draft 4 before the final report is available there. They need to know the final results. They might have access to the final results, but certainly stakeholders that are, as I say, central in terms of the preparation might want to see how you have proceeded and transferred into these various forms of documents. So what you will see is that the National Climate Information Management System, depending on the type of name you give it, would provide so many, I would say, relevant informations. For example, it can facilitate compliance with the Convention and the Paris Agreement in terms of your reporting obligations, being able to report on time. If there are queries coming up in terms of your emission estimates or tracking of your NDCs, you are able to sort of gather this information as quickly as possible and make it available to whoever wants that information. It allows all sectors to be engaged, or actors at the national level to be engaged, that will know the sources of the emissions at the national level. It helps countries to understand, certainly, the emission trends and sinks, because you can have several levels of query that you can make to the data and therefore process the data in whatever form that you need. It certainly will provide insights if you are reporting on mitigation actions, what have been the policies and actions that have been implemented or taking place over time. In like manner, you need to be looking at that system, providing information on adaptation. I've talked about means of implementation. Certainly that is critical for developing countries, and if you want to have access or provide access to that information, that the National Climate Information Management System should be able to do that. Information on support received and also provided in cases that your country are in the position or in the position to do that. Certainly, that system will allow data queries, even at the national level, for use at various levels by governments, private sector, the academia, you name it. Whoever wants to sort of use the information that's in the system to be able to further process that information for useful purposes. And the last but not the least is also, I mean, there's transparency discussion that we have in getting that information also available to the global community and being able to sort of interact with the data that you have. I think that brings me to the end of my presentation. I've added some questions that we can discuss if the participants want to do that, so that at least we have clear indication how have we sort of, if we have a system in place, how has it functioned, how does your current system handle a number of data provision, documentation, storage, and information retrieval, for example. Have you learned of experience that you want to share? That would be very important, but I know we are very limited in terms of time. So I'll leave it there, and I want to thank you very much. If you have any questions, certainly I'm happy to respond to them. Thank you very much. Aaron.
Thank you very much, William. That was very detailed, but it was very nice with an example. And then getting more into it, I'd like now to welcome my own colleague, Ana Cardoso from the UNFCCC partnership, and she's going to tell us about technical considerations for the establishment of those data information systems. Stay tuned because Anna is really very knowledgeable in this area. I hope we're going to learn a lot. Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gerardo. Thank you, everybody, for attending this webinar, and welcome to this presentation. I'll now basically walk you through what is covered in a publication that is available for download in the CBIT platform and in the ICAT website, and also in the UNEP DTU website, where you can find a lot of more information than I am presenting here. So I am basically covering the key aspects in that publication, and I invite you to later on to consult the publication so you can get more insight, more in detail information. So firstly, I would like to explain why do we have this publication and this webinar. And basically, it seems like this the NEST transparency framework will require a lot more reporting and regularly in a regular manner than what has been happened so far. And the information systems are actually the best tool for doing this systematic data management. But developing an information system project is very complex. And project developers that work in the climate area in the Department of Climate Change in the Ministry of Environment may lack experience in this area. So we think this publication is useful for pointing to the key issues that need to be taken in consideration so that these projects that the countries are embarking on are successful and that they can actually start reporting more effectively and more regularly than has been the case so far. And next slide. What? Can I move to the next slide? Sorry, some technical glitch here. So we will, in this with this publication and the webinar, I hope you'll be able to understand what is an information system for climate action and support, what it can do. I'll also recognize the barriers to developing one of these information systems project, identify different types of information system, and possibly you can all, with the presentation here and with the publication, you'll be able to arrange your own roadmap for establishing an information system, and also a bit into the methodologies and techniques that are used for developing these projects. What is an information system for climate action and support, or in general, what is an information system and why is it useful? An information system involves the use of information technologies, that is hardware, software, and communication networks to assemble, store, process, and deliver relevant and useful information to stakeholders. Why are they useful? Because they automate and systematize data management process. So they do the bulk of the work for the data management, contributing to higher efficiency and productivity. And if they're well developed and well designed, they respond to the information needs of different stakeholders. So they solve or they address a need, and they enhance the availability of information and improve the communication between stakeholders. Information systems for climate action and support have some clear benefits. William already spoke about them, so I'll go quickly, but I just want to highlight that they support policy planning. They support the development of institutional memory, so all the capacity that is needed to do the regular reporting. It's crucially supported by an information system. They engage different stakeholders in the climate agenda, and so they contribute to raise awareness, stimulate research, and strengthen the national educational efforts on this area. So there are clear benefits from embarking on these projects. But there are also barriers to the development of these projects. So very often there isn't a very clear understanding of the reporting requirements of the enhancing transparency framework and the convention in general. Most often this internal capacity is insufficient, and there is this lack of knowledge about how to implement a project like this. With no previous experience with these projects that have a software component. There is also not a lot of preparation for this kind of project. So there are no feasibility studies to inform decision makers and project developers about the benefits of this system, the costs of different options. And sometimes because of this funding process that the countries are engaged in, there's a pressure to make short-term decisions based on availability of funds during certain periods. And sometimes, and this is also very often the case, there is unclear legal and institutional framework for reporting of data. And so as long as this exists, it's very difficult to get a regular data flow. Information system can support by this institutionalization process, but it is a must to have some sort of in-place institutional framework for the reporting of data. And there are different types of information systems for climate action of support. And of course, the countries have been doing this for many years, and especially developed countries. And it can be done with a kind of a basic information system, which is not really an integrated system, and it's not really a system per se, but it's a combination of different tools that can help to fulfill this data management need. And that involves combining spreadsheets, word processors, in mail and cloud services with some specialized software for processing the data, like the IPCC software for the inventory, or other software that helps to calculate, for example, emissions and GHG impacts of mitigation actions. But this can all, I argue that this can all be improved or be more efficient if there is a specialized software or a specialized system for doing the entire MRV of climate action, emissions, and support. And this system can be integrated or can be actually a combination of independent information systems. If it's an integrated information system, it could look like this in terms of its architecture. Basically, the sectors providing the data to a major database combined with the data coming from the National Statistics Agency, with also the information about the metadata, the information about the data, the methodologies, the assumptions and definitions. And this information system will be used by the transparency team. A view of this information system will be made public with the information for general public on climate change and also for policymakers. There are a couple of examples of integrated information systems. You can find them if you look for literature in this area. For example, Australia has developed a one-stop shop for both the reporting of data for their emissions registry, and also that also feeds data for their inventory. And it has been a major project with a huge funding, and took many years for them to develop. But apparently, it reduces the burden on data providers and reduces the application of efforts. So it's actually an approach that is recommended to have this integrated information system, even not from the beginning, but as a vision of in the long term to develop such kind of system. An independent information systems is when you do not have only one database or for gathering the information for your reporting nationally and internationally. In this case here, there is an information system for this energy sector, where for the emissions registry in the energy sector, and there is another one that is used for the GHG emissions inventory, and they're not really communicating, so they're not integrated, they're independent. And an example of an independent information system pardon, is the case of Germany. It has a system for the European Union Emissions Trading System Registry and a system for the inventory, which are not really communicating. It's a possibility. It possibly requires more additional effort to combine these data sets. It possibly requires additional data transformation in order to be able to compare them. And I think possibly from what I read in some presentations I found, I think Germany was planning to move towards an integrated system. Considering an integrated or an independent information system, what are the advantages and the disadvantages? Well, integrated information systems have a lower reporting burden for the providers of data. They allow for the comparability of data sets and consistency in definitions. But they have higher setup costs, and in general they have greater complexity because it's a larger number of stakeholders involved, and it's a system of systems basically, so it's more complex. Independent information systems, they are lower in terms of cost of setup. They take less time to build, but considering a long-term view, they possibly have higher costs of maintenance. They also bring this difficulty to aggregate and compare data from different systems, and they continue to put the burden on reporting to multiple systems on data providers. So now coming to the part of the roadmap, I'll walk you through these 4 key steps of the roadmap: the scoping, the development of the system, the deployment, and the maintenance. In the scoping part, you'll be able to see in more detail what is covered in each of these stages. But to pay attention in the scoping part of the existing systems, because countries have already some sort of MRV system in place. It may be very basic and involve spreadsheets or other productivity software, but it's important to do an inventory in terms of the data that's already produced, the methodologies, the stakeholders involved of these systems, and if they're going to continue to exist, how is the data that is produced by them going to be integrated in the new information system? So that's an important aspect. And another one is the engagement of stakeholders. It's very difficult to meet the information needs of the stakeholders without consulting them. So there should be a mapping of the data providers, data verifiers, the governmental institutions, the accreditation bodies or whatever, so that they are consulted throughout the project, especially in the design and in the testing phase. And this has advantages because it contributes to acceptance and buy-in of the information system later on. The regulatory framework is also necessary for decisions on the design of information systems. Because, for example, GHG reporting programs are based on legislation, which define, for example, the sectors that are covered, the thresholds, the data types, the methodologies, and the frequency. All of these aspects are important for the specification of the new system. And so it needs to be taken in consideration. The same about the data requirements. So inventory of data sets that exist already in the country and assess the needs for data transformation of those data sets, and also to determine how data will be inserted in the information system. Are there going to be any different levels of access to the data? What issues need to be taken in consideration in terms of confidentiality, the need for anonymization of data sets, the need for aggregation, and also aspects related to granularity of data and the labeling of data in ways that ensure the multiple purposes and the use of the data for the needs of different stakeholders. And for functional requirements and non-functional requirements, there's a need to document what the information system will do, considering the needs and the objectives of stakeholders. In terms of functions, what exactly will the users of the system be able to do, and how the information system is expected to perform? Is it going to be available 24 hours over 7 days? Are there going to be some planned downtime days for maintenance? If there is some failure, when should it be working again? Does it need to exchange data with other operation systems, with other information systems? And what is the response time to the requests of information? All this needs to be considered. In terms of hardware and software architecture, well, software and hardware evolve so quickly that there isn't really an advantage of setting constraints at the scoping stage at this level, except if the software is going to be developed with in-house resources, where the people have certain capacity for doing, for building software with some programming language. Otherwise, it's better to, it's not really a hard requirement that should be considered at the scoping stage. When it comes after the scoping, when it comes to actually develop the information system, there are a couple of important decisions, but I think the key one is whether to build or to buy an information system. And for this, in the publication, you'll see there is a decision tree that helps to consider these options: to extend an existing information system, to build a new information system, or to buy an existing commercial solution. So I invite you to check this decision tree in the publication. Also, there is typically the case for this development will be to procure the provision of an information system to a software provider or a consultancy company that provides this service. And for this, there is also in the publication a template of the sections of the request for proposals that can help for this. Now, in terms of best practices in the development of information systems, well, I'm assuming that the most likely scenario is that there will be the contracting of a software provider to develop the information system. It is recommended that the owner of the project, that is the Ministry of the Environment, the Department of Climate Change, has control over access to also to the source code, to the configuration details, and that the project documentation is provided to the Department of Climate Change, so that all this is documented, and in case something goes wrong and the project cannot be delivered or has for some reason has to change to another provider, the project will not be affected, or will be affected but will not be dramatically affected, because there is proper documentation to allow that for a potential transition. And it's also recommended to use version control software to integrate multiple contributions of a team of developers and to safeguard data losses in the project. And if it's a web-based information system, there should be a test server and a production server, with the test server allowing for the project developer in the Ministry of Environment to to check the progress of the project and to do the acceptance tests. And it's actually quite important that the team in the ministry, the project developer in the Ministry of Environment, is engaged in the testing stage, and that the testing is done as thoroughly as possible, because software always has problems, and it's quite important to detect them before the software is deployed to the users, so for them to use. In terms of some examples, we can already find of information systems that have been developed by countries, and you'll find some more in the publication. There is the climate change portal of the Ministry of Environment of Lebanon. It's one of the examples that is shown there, and also of bespoke information systems developed, customized to the needs of the country. And also this one will be presented by an OC later on, the CINAMEC in Costa Rica. For the deployment stage, which comes after the system is developed, there are some considerations that about the hardware and the infrastructure. For example, where will the server of the software be located, and what are the needs in terms of equipment for having an operational information system, and also considerations in terms of the data setup. So how is the data going to be inserted in the new system? Is it going to be manually? Is there going to be some sort of data migration from an existing system? And how is the changeover process? Is it going to be done overnight? Everybody will start using the system tomorrow, or is that going to be a transition period? And what are the training needs of the users? Because it's very important to consider that even if you develop a system that is very user-friendly and that you have done usability tests and so on, it's still likely that there will be needs for training. And so what training should be developed, to whom, and how can you sustain that people will continue to get trained as they start using the system? And for this, I recommend that the countries think about a training of trainers for having some sort of super users that can capacitate other staff in using the system, because the staff turnover is a reality, and it can be quite negative for a project if people are trained and suddenly they leave. And then after the deployment comes the maintenance. Excuse me. And the maintenance, something that needs to be think in the beginning. The software requires updates regularly. There are always also corrective actions, improvements and refinements are needed. And there should be a budget plan for maintenance. And so if we put all this together in terms of time, effort for these stages, we see that the first 3 stages, possibly development and testing, and the scoping takes around roughly 25%. Development and testing takes most of the time. Excuse me. And deployment takes the least. In the maintenance stage, the software updates, the security updates, they take roughly 10%. This is estimated. 10% is for corrective actions of the existing functions. But what typically happens is that when users start actually using it, they come up with a lot of suggestions for improvements and refinements, and that takes a lot of the budget of the maintenance period. So to implement this roadmap, most likely countries will be partnering with very capable software providers and the consultancy companies But there are two typical methodologies for developing an information systems project, and one is known as the waterfall, which is basically linear in sequence of steps. Most of the steps are presented here in this roadmap. The another one is evolutionary, and this is actually more used nowadays in software projects because it allows the project concept to be refined over time and to be actually more aligned to the needs of the users. So and also to get people familiarized with techniques that exist for analyzing information systems. You get an introduction in the publication to process modeling, which is a useful technique to produce a complete view of the system, the processes it has, the data flows, the data stores, and the boundaries of the system. And you also have data modeling, which is very useful to communicate with programmers and software developers regarding the data model of the database, because it provides a blueprint of the database and the data structures that are within the database. And I invite you to look further into the publication, which you can download, and be in touch if you have any questions about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anna. Indeed, that was tremendously interesting and really gets into the details. It truly is a fascinating publication, and for the participants, the best way to find it is just to Google Anna Cardoso DTU. Then you'll get to her profile, her professional profile, and then just hit publications, and it's either the first or the second. You'll also find plenty of other fascinating publications. Thanks a lot indeed, Anna. I also am mindful that we're going a little bit over time, but I'm going to ask our attendees to please stay tuned. I think you will not be disappointed. And so now for the last presentation, we're going to have Ana Lucía Moya Mora, bienvenida, from Costa Rica, and she's going to tell us a bit more about their experience in the CINAMEC data information system. Ana Lucía, the floor is yours.
Okay, hello, good morning or good evening to everyone. I really appreciate this opportunity to share a little bit about the experience of Costa Rica in the process of building the climate change metric system that we call CINAMEC. How this journey started. So I think this is probably common characteristics of many developing countries, and in the point we are all facing these new challenges, these new transparency challenges. So we started having no actual process for registering mitigation actions. It was difficult to find climate change data. So every time we had to do a report, it took time for actually finding and knowing where the data was. We didn't have a process or a structure for this data collection. This particularly talking about the greenhouse gas inventory, that it is a report that we have been doing, but actually the structure of this data collection it wasn't that strong as we would have wanted to be. And then we didn't have adaptation or monitoring processes for monitoring it. The resources were limited, resources considering people resources and also considering finance and resources. And then we didn't have actually a clear reporting cycle, even though there's mandates of the period we have to do or to report these reports to the convention. Internally, the cycle wasn't that clear. So this is where we started. And then, let me see if my presentation, yes. The idea of creating this climate change metric system actually started in 2010. That was the year when the climate change direction of the Ministry of Environment was created. And the very first idea was to create a monitoring system just for climate change actions, particularly mitigation actions, including also the policies and plans regarding mitigations. But then the concept evolved, and around 2015, after a couple of years of designing and thinking through this first concept, we came into this second concept, in which it wasn't just mitigation, it wasn't just the plans and actions, but we integrated a more integrated idea, considering also mitigation, adaptation, climate finance, and co-benefits. And we built this concept note of the CINAMEC, of the climate change metric system, that actually has been one of the most useful things we have built. It was a strong concept with a clear line of where we want to be, a vision. And we also created this guide for registering mitigation actions into the system in 2017. That provided us a way of linking the mitigation actions with the greenhouse gas inventory. That is something that is crucial for Costa Rica in order to be able to account the reductions of the mitigation actions. And we came up with the idea that having the greenhouse gas inventory together with mitigation actions within the same system provided a better way of doing this link. So this concept also evolved from the previous concept, and the one we have right now we have three main functional areas: mitigation, adaptation, and means of implementation. And they have a transversal component of co-benefits. And co-benefits is strongly linked to sustainable development goals. And in mitigation, we consider also the greenhouse gas inventory, the mitigation actions, policies, and plans. And also we're considering registry for the offsets, the national offsets. Adaptation, we're considering also mitigation, adaptation actions and plans. And we're thinking through how to measure impact of this adaptation. And means of implementation, we are right now focusing mainly on climate finance, but we're thinking on going with the full vision of means of implementation. And then we're also linking this to a monitoring part, gathering data of these three main functional areas described before, but also linking this to modeling and projections. So linking this to a perspective unit that is going to be able to provide advice on what policies should be implemented, what mitigation or adaptation actions should be tweaked in a way to increase their impact. And this will lead to a better decision making. Currently, we recently launched the first operative version of the CINAMEC. That you can Google it, and you're going to have there the first version of this. But this is a constantly improving system, as you have just seen. And this is the first stage that we are right now working very hard in improving it. Let me see. If I can, yes, this is just right now is the greenhouse gas inventory 12. We are working on including the 2015 data results that right now available. Then how do we came with this idea? So we firstly ask ourselves, what does the country need to report? What does the country need to gather information? Why this is useful not only for the climate change direction, but also from the government itself. Then what is required to meet international reporting requirements? And then how can this be sustainable within time? How this can actually be an effort that lasts for more than a corporation project has a budget for. And kind of trying to respond to these three questions, we came up with this design that I previously presented. But one of the things that I would like to focus is on the last question. How can it be sustainable? That is one of the questions that we have actually think through for a lot, because we want this system actually to last. And we came with this Synamex philosophy that is like the main axis of this work. The first one is open software. We're focusing on open data, community of practice, and replicable model. So we came up with this, that actually the only way of a system like this can be sustainable is if it is open software, because it is difficult to find a budget within the government for actually be paying to licenses, and it is something that had happened before, that it is a lot of it is invest a lot of money and a lot of resources in creating something that then it just collapses because there's no more money for paying for the license. So we came that for us it is strongly important that the system is open software, and the system we have built is fully open software. Then open data, meaning that the data we collect is very useful, and it is crucial not only for climate change matters, but also the Ministry of Agriculture really appreciates having all this data gathered. The civil society finds it useful for doing better the fiscalization of the policies and the actions that are being implemented. And also it could be useful for some entrepreneurships. So open data for us is very important also in order to get more people involved in climate change. Then create a community of practice. This information and these processes has actually helped us to increase our organization within climate change processes, and to kind of standardize how we do things. And then a replicable model, because we consider that this is going to be actually a success if it is not just Costa Rica implementing a system like this, but also if it can be replicated within other developing countries that also have challenges regarding transparency and regarding reporting. And we have built this system open also for other countries to use it and for replicate, and also for join this community of practice that help us harmonize the way we talk and the way we gather data and the way we report it. Then how do we do this, and what was the thing we did that actually created this successful until now system? First, it was crucial to develop a strong concept. This concept note that I mentioned before, that we created the first version in 2015, that we have been updating it until now. What was, I think, the most important part of this, because we think through the whole vision of the system, not just the first step that we could do, but actually think where we want to be. And this led us to a strong roadmap that we have been working on since that time. Then this is not only just a software improvement process, it's improvement of methodologies and protocols, and organizing how we gather data, how we process data, how we do the QA/QC of this data, how we protect this data regarding confidentiality, how do we enhance our relationships with the different stakeholders. And this, for me, is actually the most useful of this. Of course, the software and how we share the information is very important, but how do we enhance our methodologies and protocols, and how do we organize the different stakeholders has been definitely a very good improvement of the processes. And then, of course, the software development has been a challenge, because software developers and climate change people speak tremendously different languages. So finding the right partner for the software development definitely is a very important part of this. We outsource the software development, but we have grow together with a software development team that they have learned a lot about climate change and learn about how we can communicate, and also understanding the software development process, that it takes time, it takes iterations, and it takes it is a process for actually seeing what you want to see. Then the how, we have had a team on the climate change direction that is mostly a team of climate change metric experts. That it has been around 2 from 3 people, the core team, but this includes also a connection with the team that develops the greenhouse gas inventory, the people that do the climate change actions, and then the software development team. And it is crucial to integrate them all and to have constant communication with them to make them part of this, because this cannot be done in an office with some people that actually are just thinking good ideas, but then they just surprise the other stakeholders with this very complex concept. The integrating of the key stakeholders that are going to actually use the system in the process of conceptualizing and designing and also implementing the first steps is crucial. And then support. Support is a key part of this, because this takes time and this takes resources. And we have had the luck of finding partners that are interested in the process and that have believed that this is actually a good idea. So we have had very good experiences integrating support of the government with support of international cooperation. And with this, I want to show you this slide that is actually something that we're very proud. The system that we have right now deployed is a result of a cooperation of a lot of different corporations, because a concept this big and a system this visionary can only be implemented if we actually cooperate with different cooperators. It's not it would have been very difficult to do it all with just one cooperation project. We have done methodologies, procedures, integration of stakeholders, and then software development with different cooperators. And this actually is a success story of cooperation of corporations. Then this is expected to improve the BUR reporting, because we gathered the information of the 3 key chapters of the BURs and outcomes: the mitigation actions, the greenhouse gas inventory, and support received. We recently presented our latest BUR, and in this BUR, this process, the system wasn't used. We are designing a transition in order to the Dynamic be used for the reporting of the next BUR, because this transition has to be think through quietly and in a way that all the stakeholders feel comfortable using it. So for this one, it wasn't used, but for the next one is going to be used. Then we're also seeing the Dynamic system as a way of transitioning to the enhanced transparency framework reporting, because the system captures data, improves the process, helps reporting, and share and visualize this information. The enhanced transparency framework reporting is definitely a challenge for a lot of developing countries, and we think that improving the processes and the efficiency of how we gather the data, how we do the process of this data, and how we do report can be done using a system like Dynamic. The challenge we faced, the first one is it is complex to access to support, because software software tools are actually something that it's not that common for cooperation. So we have to tweak how we ask for it and how we present the results in a way that is interesting for cooperation and in a way that is also useful for the country. And is complex also for getting this into the public funding. Then there's a lack of knowledge, and there's lack of knowledge of how to integrate these transparency tools and how to do software development within the governments and within the climate change people. Then the dispersion of data has definitely been a challenge, and dispersion of processes. And the software development process is complex and is something that is definitely new for climate change experts. And something that requires understanding and also to learn how this is done. Key considerations. What is important to reinforce about how to do this for us is crucial to design a strong concept from the very beginning and start with a minimum viable product. You're never going to have the full system built at once, but just to define what is your minimum that you can be living with and then improve it. And the flexibility is crucial. The system is changing a lot as the climate change world is changing a lot and the climate change process is changing. So this is very important to have a system that is aware and that is prepared for being flexible and for improving. And then having strong partners within the government. Your stakeholders should be definitely understanding and should be, they should buy in this idea. What would I do differently? It is very important to gather sample data. We have been having contact with the different data sources, but we actually don't have a library of the data they have. And if we have done that from the very beginning, you know that the Ministry of Agriculture have these data sets, and we asked them for a sample of that, it would have been much easier for actually gather that data later on and publishing that data later on. And then I think it is possible to advance faster. This has taken us more time than what I think would have taken, but this was very new for the country, and this information system for climate change in developing countries, when we started, wasn't actually that much spread. So I think if a country starts right now, it has the opportunity of go faster. Future challenges for us. We are right now in the process of capturing, organizing, and publishing the data, and this is definitely a challenge. We are implementing the protocols and processes that we have designed, and this is also a challenge in order to sustain these protocols and processes. We are facing the challenge of using this information system for building the BUR and the NatComs, and aligning this with the soon reporting formats that we're going to have for the BTRs. And then the continuous improvements of tools and the concept. We are right now working on improving the adaptation part and the climate finance part. This is a never-ending improvement process. And then we have the challenge, the happy challenge of sharing this with other countries. And for that, we have a cooperation with ICAT. ICAT is providing some support for countries that are interested in CINAMEC and that want to try this in order to use it for improving the climate change reporting processes. And this is the link in case you want to check it out. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ana Lucía. That was really, really great. And we really have most of the participants still, which means that obviously what we've been talking about is ultimately very interesting for our audience. And we have a lot of questions. First of all, I'd like to clarify that yes, the slides and the recordings will be available online. In the CIVIT platform will probably be most of the materials, and there will be links to it both from the UNEP DTU website as well from the ICAT website. And we have a few questions there. Some of them are, I think, a bit more technical, and I feel that we're not going to have enough time. So I'm going to stick to one of the many questions that we have gotten from Berit, and it has two parts. One of them is, how do you deal with different standards, type of data, attributable information, and so on? And do you have experience with the topic of data sharing and getting resistance? And so I'm going to split the question in two. I'm going to ask the first part of the question: how do you deal with different standards, types of data, and attribute information, etc., both to Anna and to William. And I'm going to ask you that your answer sticks to about 1 minute each. And the second part of the question, on the topic of data sharing and getting resistance, I'm going to ask both Henning and Ana Lucía. And again, I'm going to ask each of you to just give 1 minute to the answer. So first, Anna, what do you think about the issue of different standards, type of data, etc.?
Well, if I'm understanding what different standards means, I suppose it means that the data has been produced with different methodologies, and how can you then use this or compare this data? Well, I think that's a challenge that possibly requires data transformation if you want to compare the data, but I think we need to keep in mind that you cannot have a system that does exactly everything for you. You, as also Ana Lucía mentioned, it's good if you start with a minimum viable product that has the functionality that is that takes most of the burden from you in terms of data. And if you need to do additional data transformation in order to be able to use that data to compare it, you can always use other tools. It doesn't need to be in the information system to do that. Well, that's my view on that.
Okay, so if I can respond quickly to that question, I think it will be very difficult to have a standardized, I would say, data templates. It's really difficult because we are talking about different aspects of the information system. What information input is required from inventory will certainly be different from that you want to consider from coming from mitigation or adaptation or finance. So you cannot have a standardized data entry. I think what will be important within the context of any of these areas of work, either it's mitigation or adaptation or finance or particularly inventory, is to have a discussion with all the stakeholders in terms of data requirement and the format you want them. Yeah, so it will start actually at the national level, but it cannot be standardized across these areas of actions, for example, mitigation, adaptation, or means of implementation. That cannot be standardized.
Thank you very much, William. And the second part of the question on the experience of the topic of data sharing and getting resistance, since the possession of data is often seen as power. How do you deal with these issues? Henning, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a challenge and perhaps a central one. It has two ways of responding to it. One is creating engagement and ownership. So integrating those that own the data, and that means you have to have them on board when you create a system, when you create data sharing protocols. You have to acknowledge their contribution, and I've seen examples where those that had data were then actually ended up to be quite proud that they were contributing their data. They were contributing to a global climate change effort, and that can be extremely powerful. And of course, the other side is that you have national support for climate action, and you have the appropriate legislation and regulation and clarity in that. So that is more than the stick. Often you need actually both, and you couldn't just enforce this by legislation. You have to have the buy-in of the players.
Yeah, buy-in and a regulatory framework. Those are crucial points. Ana Lucía, what's your take on this?
Yes. Okay. So just super quick. This is a challenge that we have faced a lot, and I think something crucial where to start this from is with empathy. and try to understand why are they being resistance of change? Where is this resistance coming from? And as Henning was mentioning, is according to our experience, there's a lot of usually of, I don't want to lose my ownership on this data. I work a lot for this data, and you're just taking it out of me. And then being a usually useful way of dealing with this is providing in the system the where this data is coming from in very big letters, or like providing them a way of they can also own the data within your system. And then for the others is providing confidentiality agreements in case the resistance is coming that they are scared of somehow this data affects them, if it is shared with a broader public. And then a way that we have dealt with this is creating these very clear protocols for sharing data, and that have been shared with the data providers in a way that they know what are the rules of the game before they give us the data.
That's very clear, Ana Lucía. Well, I think this is as much as we can cover today, but I would like to thank very dearly all of our presenters, William, Ana Lucía, and Henning. I would like to thank very warmly our audience. And please stay tuned to these upcoming webinars that we'll have. We're going to cover many interesting topics, both in terms of policy and technical. In the meantime, you can check our websites. We will keep you updated. All of those, feel free to take a screenshot now. And that's as much as we can cover today. Thank you very much, everyone. See you next time.